Welcome back to Good Day Stateline. Tim Mahoney is back so quickly. Good to see you again.
Thank you very much. Great to be back here so fast.
We talked a little bit about sports last week. We talked about how much athletes actually make. And this week, we're going to talk also about sports in a different vein.
Correct.
Yeah.
We're going to talk a little bit about, there's a lawsuit that has been filed, and you're going to tell us about that. But, you know, what happens when you go to a sporting event and get injured? You know, can you sue in that type of situation? And this lawsuit that has been filed by a professional football player,
yes,
he got injured because of something that was near the field. Okay, so he was running down the field and then he hit something and then got injured. Now, generally speaking, if you're playing a sporting event, you assume the risk of the potential injuries that are related to that sporting event. So in football, you know, obviously you can get injured in several different ways. And in baseball, you get injured in several different ways. So what he's trying to argue, because he can't play ever again, what he's trying to argue is the situation that was around the field was unique and wasn't the normal situation, and it shouldn't have been there, and that's how he got injured.
And this is Aaron Patrick from the Denver Broncos. So is that like something you think he's going to win?
Well, he certainly has an argument.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's talk about assumption of the risk, because that's really the big issue here. So like if you go to a sporting event, there are certain risks that you assume just by attending a sporting event. So if you go to a baseball game and you're not behind the fence that they have, the netting, and you get hit by a ball or you get hit by a bat, you cannot sue for that. You're assuming the risk that could potentially happen. And the biggest injuries happen in baseball games and in hockey games with hockey pucks coming in. Now, if you're behind the net and the net fails, now you can probably sue because you had a reasonable degree of safety behind that net. You had an expectation that there was going to be something that was going to help protect you, okay? So that's the argument that this football player is going to have to try to make.
Gotcha.
But this assumption of the risk can go kind of far. So, I mean, there was actually a case in Chicago where a hockey player went into the stands and beat somebody up. It was a Chicago Blackhawks, and it was a opposing member, and he said something, and the guy sued, and the trial court in Chicago said, no, you assume the risk that could actually happen, that one of these hockey guys could go into the stand and beat you up. So that's how far assumption of the risk can go.
And that's kind of crazy, because you would think that one maybe he would.
I don't know, have you ever been to Chicago Blackhawks games?
Only in the real far away seats,
I think back in the day in the old stadium, I think if you went to a Blackhawks game, you were assuming the risk that you could get beat up, because those games back when they were serving the Budweiser in the bottles, those games were kind of scary back then. That's been changed obviously now, and there's a greater degree of expectation of safety. Like if you go to baseball stadiums now, the netting, it goes further. But you're a licensee at those stadiums, and that doesn't mean as much in the state of Illinois, but if you look, you know, back when we had paper tickets, but if you look on your ticket, it'll actually say that you're a licensee if you go to a basketball game or if you go to a baseball game. And what that means is you're there by their permission. And so if in the normal course of the game something happens that you get injured, you don't get to sue for that. That's part of the normal course of the game. If it's something outside of the normal course of the game, then you could potentially sue. And that would be a situation like what we talked about. So that's what this poor football player is trying to do. He can't play ever again. And we talked about last time that if you don't play, you don't get paid as an NFL player. So he's trying to say what was going on outside, you know, around the field was beyond what I assumed the risk for. And so therefore I should get to sue for it.
That's pretty complicated. But because, you know, are these trials that like a jury would be at or no?
Well, it depends. Is the court going to let him go to a jury and argue it in front of a jury? And a lot of that is going to depend based on the case law of the state that he's in. I think he's got, I read it a little bit, what little bit you can find out. I think he's got a good argument that is like, this isn't the way this was supposed to be done. You didn't protect me the way that you should. You know, we know that football players are going to run off the field during periods of time. We know that photographers are going to be there and they're supposed to get out of the way. But what he ended up getting injured on was something where he said, that shouldn't have been there, and I should have had an expectation I could have run off the field and I would have been safe. I kind of hope for his sake that he's successful, because he can't play the game ever again, and the poor guy, you know, how's he going to make a living? So.
And you know, the other person that loses is the NFL. They can pay him. I'm not a lawyer, but you know, that would be hard to convince a jury, I think. In both directions.
Anytime you're trying to convince a jury that your client deserves to be compensated, it's an uphill battle.
Yeah.
Anybody that thinks that that is easy is wrong. That is not easy. In order for you to be successful at doing something like that, there's got to be somebody who breached a rule and needs to be responsible for that rule. Accountability creates responsibility. And your client has to be injured. I mean, they have to be legitimately injured,
Sure.
and they need to be able to communicate that to the jury in order to resonate with the jury. It's always an uphill battle.
We know there's so many sporting events going on this weekend, so that's why we wanted to tie this in. You can reach out to Tim Mahoney in so many ways, all right on your screen. Thanks for coming in, and happy Thanksgiving.
Happy Thanksgiving to you too.
Coming up next, we're helping you plan your next social media worthy vacation, and then we're revealing the State Line's best pie. We'll be right back.